Hello, my name is John, and today on Mono Story we're going to be talking about high school in anime and manga. So let's get into it and find out what it's all about. During a story, there is a lot of different locations that are chosen for the main vocal point of the story, and often in anime and manga, most of these writers or mangaka will choose to place the story in a high school, meaning that the story consists of a lot of different students as well as tropes and general lifestyle things that are revolving around a student as they go to high school. And recently on the Trash Taste podcast, which is consistent of three main people known as Gant, Connor, and Joey, they were discussing about high schools in anime and manga and why they were so prevalent. And Joey's statement claimed that it was about how high school in Japan is one of the best times for a Japanese person, as once they head into the workforce, they have a lot less freedom, meaning that they are very nostalgic for things that remind them of their high school life.
It's because it's, for a lot of people, like high school is kind of seen as like this basically like golden time.
However, not everyone agreed with Joey on this take, and it created a lot of controversy, especially with an individual on Twitter who made the statement that his life was not as good as it is today, meaning that Joey was wrong, and he was very upset and frustrated with this statement. The individual on Twitter also stated that Trash Taste didn't know what they were talking about when it comes to the lifestyle in Japan in regards to people and the work culture. Now, in regards to life in Japan, we first have to talk about their work culture, and it often is very draining. Now, not all jobs in Japan require you to work a lot of overtime and long hours. Yes, you have to work your regular 8 hours Monday to Friday, but you are still given often a lot of time to relax and do your own thing. But for the most part, if you want to be making lots of money, then you will have to work a lot of overtime and spend a lot of time at the office. And this can often wear an individual down to the point where they are walking around the street like a zombie with no thoughts, no actions, they're just going back and forth to work. However, high school is the opposite, where there is lots of freedom and potential, where you have the ability to do not as you choose, but you have a lot more opportunity. So it is very easy after a long day of work, when you're on the train or at home, to read some manga or watch anime or another form of media that will allow you to have that escapism from the monotony of reality, which is why people do watch a lot of these shows. Preferably, they will watch also a lot of anime and manga set in high school, but not because of escapism, because there are other reasons for this situation. Despite the fact you can make the argument that most anime and manga is set in a high school setting, it isn't necessarily for a form of escapism. Actually, it is because it is easier to write that story. Because in the high school setting, there are a lot of variables that are easily able to be written effectively. You could do such things as having people meet each other. It's very organic. Having them work on a project together, having rivalries. All of them happen naturally through the course of the story because they are naturally together in a high school setting. And so for a mangaka, a writer of anime or manga, this is very easy to write for and to make a lot of situations more simplistic but yet more complex, because you are using your own experiences in that situation and then extrapolating from them to create this fictional situation within the story. And so if you do take the story out of a high school setting, you are now stuck with a lot of different variables that you have to come up with a situation for based on the world that you now have to create. So let's say we were to take a complex story such as Gundam 0079 or the 1 Year War, you would first have to create the story of the locations within Earth, as well as the colonies in space, numbering them between 1 to 6, including 7 as well. You would then need to create two factions, have one faction dislike the other based on a reason, which is because of lack of resources, and then you'd have to create the actual situation that caused that indication that the other faction of Xeon in this case is angry with the Federation being the other faction, and then you'd have to create a situation where the Federation were creating a new machine to try to defeat Xeon in the case of an MS Gundam. Then you would need to go on to create the system in which how are they going to defeat Xeon and go through all the different locations, Jaburo, Odessa, Solomon, Albalku, all of these different locations you'd have to go through. Within that, you have to then create a whole entire backstory to those locations. Where if I just use a high school, I already have an understanding of what that is as a writer, a reader, and on top of that, you can create a very simple story like, let's say, aliens attacking the Earth, high school students have to stop them. Done. You've got like 3 to 4 stories out of that already. So the location of a high school is a lot more easier because you can do a lot more things and you don't have to create as much, meaning you can focus more on the story rather than the locations. Another aspect that gives a high school setting a more simplistic and more easier way of writing is that it allows the writer to write the characters more easily because they are very young naturally. Therefore, they have limited experiences, meaning that the backstory would be quite short and you are able to mold that character throughout the story. However, if you were to take, let's say, a older character in a more unique setting, then you have to create a backstory into which us, the readers, are more intrigued by that character, and you then have to create a situation in which it might have spanned for a very long time, depending on their age. If someone is 50, you've got 40 years of coverage. You have to at least explain to the reader or watcher of that story that this character is the way they are because of these 40 years, which means you would need a lot of different complex situations to get that character development. And in the case of, let's take a fantasy setting, you are requiring a lot more different situations to get the same result as you would in a high school setting, except that they'd be more complex. Let's take our situation, for example, with Zoro and how he wants to be the #1 swordsman from One Piece. And in this story, we first have to get Zoro fighting with Kuina at a location about training to become the #1 swordsman or a very good swordsman. We would then furthermore have to get Zoro to continually lose to the point where the only way he could win is that Kuina was deleted through illness, meaning that despite how much Zoro trained, he continually was losing, and the only way he can feel like he will win in that situation is that now he has to go fight all of these different swordsmen to become the #1 swordsman. And so this backstory creates loss, but also opportunity for Zoro in the fact that he has belief in his future and he's not only fighting for himself but for Kuina, who could never fight after that point of the story. However, if you compare that to a high school setting, there are two people that are naturally going to be rivals of each other in that setting because they are naturally together with each other, and organically they might even become friends over time depending on what happens in their lives.
有馬昴生君、君が好きです。好きです。好きです。
High school settings are fairly common in anime and manga. They are the vocal point for a lot of different stories. Bunny Girl Senpai, Toradora, Your Lie in April, and a bunch of other stories. And despite them being a form of escapism and entertainment for other people due to nostalgia from the autonomy of Japanese life, it is also a lot more easier to not only write the world but the characters in the story, meaning that despite the fact that they do provide that escapism and entertainment, it isn't the necessary reason for them to be the reason for them being so prevalent in the story. However, they are more used by writers and mangaka because not only for the writer but the reader or watcher of that anime has more of an understanding to a high school setting because everyone has to go through high school in order to at least get some form of education, meaning that story will have connections to an individual, disagreement from another individual, but at the end of the day, one thing is clear, and that is everyone can understand and enjoy high school stories, because one thing about high school is that it reminds you of a time in which you believed the only thing that could stop an individual was whatever you believed it to be. Because in youth, you are all potential, and from that potential, you can do whatever you want as long as you put the work in. But that is my thoughts on high school in anime and manga. I want to hear what you think about this. Is it a good thing or bad thing, and why? And also, do you think that Joey was speaking the truth, or do you think the person on Twitter was correct? So please write that down in the comment section below. My name is John from Mono Story. If you haven't already, like, subscribe, and press the bell button, please do so. And until next time, I will see you on another Mono Story.